Welcome back to another episode of Convos on the Couch. Today I am joined by my friend Ben Klassen, and I'll let you introduce yourself, just kind of share what you do, but also your history in politics and a little bit also on your faith.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So, I'm Ben. Currently I work at the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, which is a civil liberties organization that essentially sues the government when the government encroaches on Canadians' rights and freedoms. So that's fun. I usually get smiles when I tell people that. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Especially in light of our government in recent years. So.
Yeah.
I'm their education programs coordinator, so I do a lot of research and writing. I write reports on government bills that are, potentially dangerous for our rights and freedoms. So, for example, Bill C-18, the Online News Act, is a bill that I did a report on last year. Okay. And right now I'm researching central bank digital currencies, which that is so fun, actually.
Okay. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so central bank digital currencies, cryptocurrencies and stable coins have become quite popular, like right. Bitcoin and, USDC, I think it is. The stable coin that is pegged to the United States dollar. And there's also a number of other ones, so these are becoming quite popular, and so banks are now, becoming concerned that, people are going to migrate to these and stop using their currency. So that's going to do a couple of different things. So banks are trying to catch, tax evaders and people who, fund terrorism and other illicit financial activities. So if people go to these types of currencies that are private and secure and so then they won't be able to catch those as much. Like private banks, they have to go through our finances and our transactions to potentially catch illicit financial activity. And so that's one thing. And the second thing is, monetary sovereignty, where they're trying to have good financial policies that, to control overnight inflation rate, to really control inflation and those types of things.
Okay.
And so banks are these cryptocurrencies, they're taking off. So we need to have our own cryptocurrencies. At least that's what they're saying. So the criticism is that these, central banks, they're trying to, or governments are having their central banks explore these CBDCs, that's what they're called, central bank digital currencies, because every transaction is, of course, digital and can be traced. And so right. The criticism is that governments want to trace every dollar that people spend. And this is a phenomenon it's a global phenomenon.
Right, yeah.
I think, I can't quite remember, but I'd say, I think it's around 80% of countries in the world right now that are exploring CBDCs. 3 countries have already implemented it. I think it's eight countries that are already in pilot phase where they're actively testing their CBDCs. And so again, the criticism is that they're going to use these CBDCs, take away cash, and use these CBDCs so that they can track every transaction that people make, and so then be able to control them. You know what I mean? Let's say you bought too much fuel, and then now all of a sudden your social credit score is gonna go down in China.
Yes.
And or you donated to the wrong political party, and so all of a sudden your credit score goes down because the central bank is able to view, the central bank and thus the government is able to view all your transactions.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's a very complicated thing too, though, because it's very it's this technology is cutting edge technology, and it's very, very complicated. And so in the Western democracies, I don't think that they will track citizens like that, at least not in the beginning. But
wow,
it's a huge
thing. And that's what you're writing on right now, primarily.
Mm-hmm.
And
over the last couple of weeks,
you can't write opinion pieces, right? These aren't opinion pieces.
They are reports that are researched, but also the Justice Center's statement or view on these things. So, I research them. I find out what the Justice Center is. The Justice Center takes a classical liberal freedom approach to everything. We want as a maximum amount of freedom for Canadians as possible.
Yeah.
We view that as a good thing.
Yeah.
And so that's the approach that we take. And so whenever I research these bills and write reports on them, I investigate what the Justice Center's approach should be, and then that comes into the paper then too. So yeah.
Wow, so cool. And where are these being published?
On our website at jccf.ca. We also send them over to reporters and so on. So reporters pick up on them and write news stories on them and so on.
So is this journalism that you do?
No.
How is it different?
So journalism would be investigating things that are going on currently, like news and so on. Journalism is short form, not so much opinion, whereas these reports, they are very in-depth, like, this report is probably going to be a 25-page report.
Whoa!
Yeah, and so they're massive. They take lots of time to write.
What kind of education do you have or background to love this job?
Yeah, so I have a BA in bachelor's in political science from the U of C.
Okay.
And so earlier you asked me about my background in political science. So I did my bachelor's at the U of C in political science, and in 2022, before I graduated, I actually went to Parliament Hill and worked there over the summer as part of the Conservative Party of Canada's internship for young people. So I did that. I've also had an internship with MP Rachel Harder in Lethbridge before. And other than that, just been involved with some campaigns here or there.
You've always been politically inclined.
It's interesting because I wouldn't really say so, but I've always been very passionate about justice. I can remember when I was young, I was like, 6 or 7, that, I heard stories about like injustice happening to people, and then I'm like people got to do something about this, and it would make me angry.
Okay.
And so I've always had that. Yeah. Now, in terms of politics specifically, my grandpa. So I grew up in Mexico, actually.
Right.
Yeah, I was born and raised there. Partially in Belize. We lived in Belize for 8 years, but I came to my family and I came to Canada like 8 years ago. But anyway, my grandpa was very much interested in and up to date with politics.
Okay.
So we'd sit around the dinner table with my grandpa, and he would talk for hours about things going on in the country and so on. And so I was always very fascinated by that. Yeah. And so, but I never really thought that I was going to, go into politics or really law even. I didn't really know. I had so many interests growing up. But then when I was 20, I went to YWAM in Germany.
Wait, did I know this?
I'm not sure.
I don't think I knew that you went to YWAM.
Yeah. So I went to YWAM in Germany. That's where I did my training in 2018, I think it was.
Oh my god.
Yeah, and then I went to Egypt and Lebanon for my outreach.
Okay.
And so when I was in Egypt, we visited prisons there and talked with prisoners and so on. And some of the prisoners told me that, I did this minor thing, I'm from like Costa Rica or something. Came here, did this minor thing in Egypt, and now I've been incarcerated for 10 years and haven't had a judicial hearing yet and so on. And, and in Lebanon, we, visited, refugee camps and so on. So there again, I just saw like some of the injustices and I was thinking about, the refugees came from Syria, and I was thinking about political systems and that cause these types of things to happen, and the kinds of political systems that cause injustices in the judicial system to happen in Egypt and so on. So when I came back, I was like, man, I know I want to do something that could make a difference in this world, but I don't know what. And so, so I started studying, just taking random courses like history and so on. Yeah. And then I took a political science course, and I'm like, that's it.
Wow. So, yeah. Okay, cool. You were telling me that you have started this group where you guys have a topic that you research prior to?
Yeah, so it's not necessarily research, but So it's a small group of young Christian men who, want to be better leaders in society. So it's like, it's not necessarily like a discipleship club where we're just trying to, let's say, grow in our faith. It is, we are all already like kind of like leaders in one area or another, like and mature Christians and so on. We just want that next level of conversation, I guess, and understanding of like practical things in life.
Yeah.
Whether that be politics or art or how to engage with, let's say, immigrants and how to make them feel welcome, or many different topics. And we meet twice a month. Someone chooses a topic that they're interested in, and then they also provide a resource. And so often that is a podcast or some reading. We might also go through books as well sometime down the line. But yeah, we just started it like in November last year. So
and I'm curious, what topic has fascinated you the most so far?
I don't know. I think probably kingdom of God versus the kingdom of this world, that one is, has always been fascinating to me, I would say. To what extent should Christians be involved in politics and all that? So that one was a very, very interesting conversation.
And is it just discussion, or do you guys come to a conclusion?
It's mostly just discussion without necessarily trying to come to a conclusion, although we are obviously trying to learn from one another and spit our ideas off and see what other people think, and then learn from that. Yeah. Not necessarily conclusions, but we are trying to arrive at a better understanding of the topic.
So what was the better understanding you arrived at in discussing the kingdom of heaven?
Well, many things, I guess. First of all, we were talking about voting, for example. It came up in the resource, the podcast that we were listening to, or that we listened to prior to these conversations, that Christians should be kingdom voters, not necessarily be very partisan voters. You know what I mean? Like, for example, you're in Canada, we shouldn't just be like, nope, I'm a conservative and that's it, and without considering the Liberals or NDPs or other people's opinions. And the reason is because we are not of this world. Like we belong to a different kingdom. Jesus' kingdom is not of this world. And it's Jesus' kingdom is actually quite subversive as far as the solutions to societal problems and so on. And so while we recognize that politics is important and Christians should vote in and maybe even be engaged in politics, that's not the primary solution to the social ills in society. It's people and so on. So Christians should really engage at that level. But in terms of voting, Christians should not just be partisan voters, but kingdom voters. And what that means is Christians should, more so than really other voters, than secular voters, they should primarily be concerned about the truth and about pursuing, doing research and being voters according to the truth, let's say, truth according to the Bible and so on.
Right. I feel like a lot of people would say a kingdom voter would vote compassionately.
Mm-hmm. But the thing is, compassion is not true compassion without justice. Because, you need justice in order to have true compassion, just like you need truth in order to have love. Those two things always go hand in hand.
Whoa.
Let's think of a person who, let's say, rapes a 12-year-old child and then murders him. It's not compassion for the family of the victim if there's not justice involved for the perpetrator of the crime.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Vice versa, it's not true justice if you don't also consider the situation, if you don't also have some sort of compassion for the perpetrator, and consider his past. Like, let's say maybe he grew up in a terrible home, his stepdad abused him, and just no one ever showed love to him. All the cards in his past were all stacked against him. It's tricky, for judges who have to decide on these kinds of cases, but they do take these kinds of cases into account, like the mental state of these people and so on. So without taking these kinds of things into account, without being compassionate in that way, it's not true justice either. Like the situation as a whole, justice hasn't been served. And so, again, the same thing I think applies to truth and love. You don't truly love someone unless you're also being truthful to them, and you're not being truly truthful unless you're also loving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is so good. I haven't heard that before. That's so good.
You know, this runs really at the core of, you know, conservatives versus left. You know, conservatives are more tend to lean more towards justice, and the left tends to lean more towards compassion.
Yeah.
So if you have the liberal or the left side in government for too long, you'll have criminals running, repeat offenders running on the streets because, you know, we got to be compassionate. We can't label them as criminals and all these things. That all comes from a good place because they look at their situation and they look at, like, you know, their past and so on. They were trying to be compassionate. Yeah. But the conservatives are like, all fair, but we need to look at the justice. What is just? Like, there are like repeat offenders. They are going to continue to repeat or offend, and and that's not justice. It's not justice towards other people. You know, and it's very unfair and unjust. And so, like it's like I think this divide runs very deep.
So then, for the lack of compassion on the conservative side, do we actually see negative effects of that in a conservative government?
I'm really talking in terms of tendencies. Right. So I think recently, especially in recent Canadian politics, I would think that the conservatives, now I'm obviously biased because I'm a conservative, I think the conservatives have a more holistic view of the whole thing. Like they are, you know, we got to have justice, while they also are like, yes, we got to have compassion. Yeah. Whereas the left has been too much concerned with compassion, and like in terms of weaknesses, I don't know, like maybe the United States, you know, with their war on drugs policy, for example. You know, like, war and drugs destroy lives, but then, you know, so now you shut people in prison for decades just for having had a little bit of weed. Well, how's that justice? You know what I mean? Like, you know, you are literally destroying lives by putting them in prison for decades just for making a stupid mistake when you were 17 or whatever, 21 or whatever. You know what I mean?
I want to know your thoughts on how much faith and religion should be intertwined in politics or vice versa.
Good question.
That's my first one.
Yeah. You know, it really, I think, depends on what you mean or what people mean by that. Because are we talking about the church's involvement in religion, or are we talking about individual Christians?
I'm talking about individual Christians.
Right.
How much should Christians care about politics?
Okay, so I think Christians should care a lot about politics. But I also think that Christians should be very hesitant to think that politics is the solution to all of our problems nowadays, you know? Yeah. That politics cannot change people's hearts. Yeah. Only, you know, I would argue faith is probably not the only thing that can change people's hearts, but faith is, you know, obviously as a Christian, I believe that Christian faith is the best way to change any society, any culture. Politics is supposed to uphold, you know, justice in society and you know, enforce certain necessary laws and so on. It's the church's role. You know, depending on, you know, who you are, but as Christians, we should view that it is the church's role to change people's hearts, to change society. And the thing is, politics is downstream of culture, you know, because in a democracy, we vote for politicians and so on. So the more conservative your country is, the more conservative your culture is, the more conservative your MPs are going to be. And the more, if we want to ensure that we have good political, not necessarily the system, because that's already in place, but good, you know, political culture or good, you know, laws and so on, you know, then we first need to really change culture, and then, you know, this culture is going to select good politicians who are then going to implement good laws. Oftentimes, it is tempting to think that, we need to get into these public offices and then change change culture and change society downstream, you know?
Right.
And really, that works sometimes, you know, in the long run, where you incrementally make laws that, let's say right now, Canada has no abortion laws. You know, most Christians would agree that that's a bad thing. And so maybe we could slowly, with baby steps, kind of change culture and so on. But politics is not a great way to change culture, though. Like, people don't listen to politicians to figure out what they should believe. Like, they talk to their friends, they talk to whatever their peers and so on. And then that determines who they vote for, which then determines what kinds of policies we have.
Right.
You know what I mean?
So you're saying the church needs to be at the top of this stream to affect culture, which is going to affect politics.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, that doesn't mean that politics is not important. And so that is in terms of, like, you know, changing culture. Now, one question that I was grappling with last year is, you know, I'm a conservative, but in terms of politics, in terms of, like, how much power I think the government should have and so on, I'm a classical liberalist, which means essentially that I think the federal government especially shouldn't have a whole lot of power, shouldn't be able to do, you know, shouldn't have a whole lot of responsibilities. Defend our borders, enforce, you know, justice, the justice system, break up monopolies, and of course a couple of other things, but right now the state is Canadian state, and most states around the world, I think, are way too big, as in they do way too much. And so, but a question that I was grappling with last year is, okay, so we say we have freedom of religion, and so, you know, separation of state and church and all that. Some people view that as, okay, like, Christians, you know, people with faith, you know, should not bring their faith into politics, regardless of what religion you're from. But that's not so. And the term separation of state and church, I think it came from Thomas Jefferson, anyway, like the founding fathers of the United States, and that was never their view. It became the view, I think, in the like, oh man, I can't quite remember, but sometime during the 1900s, I want to say 1960s. Eric Metaxas writes about that in his Letter to the American Church, that's a really good read.
Oh, interesting.
Founding fathers had the view that where in the UK the government was, you know, dictating what religion people, the Anglican Church and so on, there wasn't true religious freedom like the Puritans and many other religious people from different denominations got persecuted. And so now they wanted a government where the government would never tell people what they could, you know, believe in, how they should practice their religion. The government must stay out of people's faith. So it was not the other way around, which is now it's viewed as really both ways, where the government has to stay out of people's affairs, religious affairs and their beliefs. But religious people can also not, you know, vote according to their views and propose policies that stem from their beliefs. But that's never what the founding fathers. You know. Now you do run into a little bit of a trouble if you do like the mental thought process. Let's say you now have 60% of politicians, of MPs, let's say in Canada, that are all Christians. Let's say at least 60% of Canadians are not Christians, though, but for some reason, you know, more Christian MPs, you know, 60% of the MPs are Christians. So now they would have the power to enforce, you know, to pass laws, you know, against abortion, but any other things that Christians don't agree with, you know what I mean? And so now, you know, that would essentially be the state now imposing their religion on people. You see what I'm getting?
Yes.
So you know, if you get to that point, then that would be like, well, now the state is enforcing their, you know, their faith on people. Now,
because it's the same if like 60% were Muslim.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I'd be so upset about that.
Yeah, exactly. Classical liberalism is a good thing in secular societies up until a certain point, because at some point it can undermine itself because not all cultures necessarily agree with the classical liberal values of freedom. And so if we immigrate so many people into a country, like, now this is unlikely to happen, people mix into the culture and they adopt, these kinds of values as well. The thought process that if you invite so many people into your country that don't share these values, to the point where eventually 55% of these people don't share these freedom values, now they would use their freedom to undermine the freedoms of other people. So now it's no longer a truly classical liberal or freely democratic society anymore, or where people's freedoms are respected. And in terms of faith, 60% of MPs imposing their faith on society, I think that is unlikely to happen in a truly Christian state, because Christians should know that you cannot enforce your faith on other people. Right. But not all the religions agree to that. So I still think that MPs should be able to, propose policies and vote according to their faith. But go ahead.
I can't think of a single policy that's actually, for example, abortion. We believe abortion is wrong as Christians, but also we believe it's wrong scientifically, biologically. It would be hard to make that argument, like you're voting based on your faith.
Philosophers talk about this, have been debating about this for a long time, but some philosophers, classical liberal philosophers will often say that any bill that you propose, even if it is inspired by your religious beliefs, you still need to be able to make a secular argument for that. If you cannot make a secular argument for that, then you should not propose the bill. So, for example, with abortion, since I'm a classical liberalist, I would say we should not make the case that abortion should be illegal because it's sinful. I think that we should make the case that abortion should be illegal because killing people is sinful, and killing babies in the womb is murdering human beings, and governments have the political responsibility and duty to protect human life. That's what they are, and to protect their citizens. I would argue that extends to human life in the womb as well. That's a completely secular argument. It's not a Christian argument at all.
Is there any Christian argument that can't be argued secularly?
How about homosexual marriages?
Well, there's studies on the kids that are raised in same-sex homes. There's
also studies that show that they do quite well. I too would say these studies that show that they turn out just as well as other kids that grow up in other families, they might be biased. And one of the reasons that they probably could be biased is because, let's say, two men raise kids. And so they're going to be aware of society's, a huge portion of society's view that, we can't raise good kids. So guess what they're going to do? They're going to, use extra effort to make sure that they train up their kids well. So of course, with extra effort, even though it's not ideal, the situation between, having two fathers, for example, but they're going to be able to mitigate at least some of the negative effects by, exerting extra effort and, And so, so that example in terms of gay marriage, so of course, Christians believe that, gay marriage is sinful. But let's say we want to come up with a secular argument. So that would be one thing, maybe they turn out worse than others, but that's not so clear. Okay. How about disease or whatever, know? And how about should smoking also be illegal then too? Or, drinking beer or eating McDonald's? You know what I mean? If we should make homosexual marriages illegal because of the diseases or
Are Christians actually expected to vote against?
No, not necessarily that they're expected, but if a Christian MP was convinced that God wanted them to propose a bill that would make homosexual marriages illegal again, they should be allowed to propose that bill in the House of Commons. You know what I mean? And so in Canada, such a bill would never be passed. It's just not, even if it were possible, it would not be strategically, a good thing, because let's say by some miracle, 60% of MPs actually were Christians and agreed with the view of that MP. And then they were like, we'll pass it. Because Canada is so largely secular, there would be huge backlash against it, and conservatives wouldn't come back into power for decades. You know what I mean? They just completely shoot themselves in the foot. So it's not practical or strategically advantageous for them. So, and that's one thing that I think sometimes Christians forget about, even in terms of policies like abortion. They're like, we should make abortion illegal right now. Well, Jesus also calls us to be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. So as innocent as doves, okay, yeah, propose these kinds of good policies, but you must also be shrewd about it in terms of look at the political landscape, look at what's practical and strategical,
Right.
You know what I mean? If we're not going to make any compromises on what kinds of bills get passed, as in like we're just like, no, make it illegal entirely right away, then
Right.
no abortion policy is ever going to be
Right.
passed.
Yeah.
So we need to use baby steps, and that's
Yeah.
practical. Yeah.
That's so good.
Yeah.
So one thing that I've wrestled with in the last year is thinking about immigration.
That's a big one. There's lots of things to be said about it, but I don't think that immigration is bad per se. One of the questions that we have to ask is, or answer, I guess, is are all cultures equal? You know, like in terms of their validity or their goodness. As a Christian society, or we're really no longer, but a largely Christian society with largely Christian values, like values of freedom and values of even like traditional family, like that's still quite valued. We value religious freedom. So I think that it's okay, and actually we should view our culture as better than others. Like I don't think that that's it might be a politically incorrect thing to say, but I don't think that is necessarily wrong. Yeah, especially for us as Christians, if we we hold these values to be actually a matter of morality and so on. Mm-hmm. So if we immigrate a lot of people who hold these values, as long as it doesn't undermine our economy, why not continue to immigrate those kinds of people who share these values? And it just boosts our economy, again, as long as it doesn't undermine it. But the problem is when you start immigrating too many people that don't share these values and are not wanting to assimilate. Now, I'm not making that statement about any particular group of people, but there are some people that are resistant to that, to assimilating to and adopting our values. And for the most part, though, so many immigrants, whether that is from India or from the Middle East or from South America or Europe or so on, so many immigrants that come to Canada actually value our rights and freedoms almost more than a lot of Canadians that have been here for generations.
Yeah.
Because they came from places where they didn't have these rights and freedoms. If immigration comes to a point where too many people are immigrated that are not willing to assimilate, then that eventually has the potential to undermine our liberal immigration values, mm-hmm. Let's say. We can't discriminate against people. And I think actually we should never discriminate against anyone within our own country, but we must discriminate at the immigration services. And if we don't, then we will continue to immigrate those kinds of people that are not willing to share our values.
Yeah. So you think assimilation is important?
Yes. You
think if someone is coming into our country, they need to adopt our culture and
our certain cultural values. Not necessarily cultures are beautiful. It's a beautiful thing, I think, to have many different cultures, regardless of what culture you're coming from and how much you're celebrating it. You should still be willing to adopt the overarching Canadian culture. I don't know, drink Tim Hortons and those and say a little bit too much. I'm sorry, but yeah, you should be willing to adopt the overall Canadian culture and celebrate it. You should not be against Canada. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you should definitely, in terms of the assimilation that I'm talking about, is adopt the kinds of values of individual rights and freedom of expression, freedom of religion. Those are two very important ones. Respect for all life.
I find myself thinking, if you're coming to our country, you have to become like us. You have to learn our language. You have to adopt our culture. Then I am torn because I know that different cultures are beautiful and Jesus loves all these different cultures.
All I know, is that, we can learn from different cultures, but also if there's too much diversity, people say diversity is a strength. It actually is not. Not necessarily. Not politically. If it's just culture that does not have political consequences, like let's say we eat baranakia, which is a Mennonite food that came from Ukraine, those types of things have, pretty much zero effect on politics. Certain cultural values that have political ramifications. So, for example, what role women should play in the public has huge ramifications. Yeah. It's not necessarily the case that diversity is a strength.
Right.
Yeah, diversity can actually undermine. For example, in the United States, there's a lot of internal divide, and I would argue that is probably in huge extent due to not enough unity. I need to think about that more though. Yeah.
Very
good question though.
What is the purpose of the church? What is the church supposed to be? What's it supposed to look like? What is its role? I feel like a lot of churches I've been to feel very catered to the new believer. Or the person who's never known Jesus before. What is the role of the church? Is it for the new Christian? Is it for the person who's never walked into a church before and they've never met Jesus before? Or is it for the mature believer to grow and be fed spiritually?
Wow, you're not asking me small questions here, eh? Frank, this is something this is something that theologians have been wrestling with for centuries. I don't know the answer per se to this, but I guess I have some thoughts about it. And it does depend on what you mean by the church. Do you mean the gathering of the church on a Sunday morning, or do you mean the body of the church?
I mean the gathering of the church on a Sunday morning.
Okay. Yes, I think that it depends on what happens throughout the week. Because if the entire church as a whole is structured so that the Sunday morning service is the most important thing throughout the week, and most attendees, they're not really part of discipleship groups or small groups, then the less of those kinds of discipleship groups and small groups you have throughout the week, the more you should disciple your congregation on a Sunday morning. All Christians need to be discipled. Being a Christian is not just like accepting Jesus into your heart and say the sinner's prayer and then now you're saved and you're gonna go to heaven and you don't need to ever do anything anymore. Like, that's not the kind of Christianity that Jesus calls us to. Jesus calls us to follow him. And what it means to follow him, it means to follow in the footsteps of him. Back when Jesus was here on earth, there was a bunch of rabbis all the time. Initially, Jesus was just viewed as one very smart rabbi. Jews afterwards still believed that he was a rabbi who engaged in blasphemy, but others came to believe that he was more than a rabbi. He was actually the Son of God, and those then became Christians. But during that time, Jewish boys would go through school from up until grade 12, and they would have memorized the Torah. And so whichever student was super bright, they would try to be taken on by a rabbi. But it was not the student who chose a rabbi, it was a rabbi who chose a student. And whenever the rabbi would invite a student to follow them or to be their student, it would be with the intent that the student would study not only the things that the rabbi teaches, but also their ways of doing things and would try to become like them.
Right.
And so when Jesus invited his disciples to follow him, it was an invitation to become like him, to do the kinds of things that he did, and that was going to foster the kind of character that Jesus had, which was then going to foster the kinds of people that Jesus was. Yeah. So that's still our call today. We need to follow Jesus and do the kinds of practices that help us become like Jesus. We cannot do that without discipleship and without each other. We cannot do that on our own. Community is a very central part of that. That is one of the most important things about the body of Christ, is that we continue to minister to one another. That's one of the primary ways that God actually speaks to us. He speaks to us through the Bible. He speaks to us through the Holy Spirit, but he also speaks to us through the church, through the body of Christ, through pastors, yes, but also through people just praying for one another. And I feel like God is wanting to tell you this. That's how God speaks to us, and we need that. So that's the body of Christ supposed to serve one another to become more like Christ. And so Sunday morning service, if most of your congregation isn't really involved in discipleship groups or small groups or whatever throughout the week where they get this kind of discipleship, and not just discipleship where you minister to one another, but also go through good resources that help you learn, because studying and learning scriptures is actually a spiritual discipline as well. The less of that you have throughout the week, the more of that you need on Sunday morning. Okay. And so if your church, however, is very strong on you should get involved into a small group. Like, as soon as you are a regular here, as soon as you say that this is your home church, you should be involved in a small group, and there's like a teaching every week, and people get together, share a meal, and they do the community thing to build each other up, and it's a discipleship agent. then on a Sunday morning, yeah, okay, tell your congregation to invite new people, and we're going to share a message that is helpful for everyone, but also is very much helpful and insightful to those people who are new to church, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of my view on it.
That's a very good way of answering that. We'll wrap it up with your thoughts on the US election, which I know is not a new thing anymore, but the inauguration is coming up. And then also on Justin Trudeau resigning.
Yeah. Man, exciting times we live in, right? I mean, I wouldn't say that I am in a position to give strong predictions. I don't stay that up to date with US politics, but obviously a very exciting election result. This was probably one of the most important elections in the world's history. Not just US history, I think the world's history.
Wow.
The consequences of this election was absolutely huge. Not everyone will agree with me, but I know Elon Musk shares the same view, and multiple other political commentators also share the same view, that if the Democrats had won, they do not share a value of freedom of expression. Not anymore. Used to, actually, but not anymore. You know, and then with opening the border to, you know, thousands of illegal immigrants, and then shipping them to states where, you know, they needed more voters, to swing states, and then not being against election fraud, allowing these people to vote, even expressing that explicitly, that yeah, we want to fast track them towards citizenship. So another 4 years could have been allowed the Democrats to give enough of these new immigrants citizenship so that these swing states would no longer have been swing states, and then that would have been the end of a bipartisan or free election. That would have just been a democratic state, essentially. So that was kind of the fear. I don't know how much we know that would actually have been the case, but I'm very excited about Trump, you know, coming in, about closing the borders, the economic policies that he's going to implement.
A lot of people are saying that as a Canadian, I should be horrified that Trump got in, because mostly they're talking about the tariffs.
Yeah. You know, in the short term, yes, it's going to hurt us more, yes. But in the long term, it's obviously going to be a good thing, because America is our greatest trading partner. If they're doing good, we're doing good. If they're protecting their freedom of expression, we're much more likely to protect our freedom of expression. If they're protecting their borders, we're going to protect our borders more. Like, America has such a huge influence on Canada that even though, the 25% tariff, I hope it doesn't go through, because that would hurt Canada a lot. But even if it did go through, I think Pierre Poilievre would eventually, if he's going to come in, I think he's going to be able to negotiate some sort of deal. I'm pretty sure. I would say, at least. So yes, it's going to hurt Canada, but in the long run, if it's going to make America stronger, all these Trump policies, then it's ultimately also going to make Canada stronger. And then in terms of Canadian election coming up here, Justin Trudeau's prorogation of Parliament, you know, obviously it's exciting that he's stepping down, but the Justice Centre is also suing the government for proroguing Parliament for 11 weeks, because there was a clear indication, like Liberal MPs had clearly indicated that they were going to vote Justin Trudeau out, which would have caused an election. Well, he made the announcement on Monday, and they were going to vote him out on Wednesday. By proroguing Parliament by 11 weeks, it allows Justin Trudeau to stay in power for another 11 weeks. Whereas if he hadn't prorogued Parliament, it would have caused an election, which would have been democratic, because there was a democratic expression from the MPs on Parliament Hill that they wanted an election. Yet Justin Trudeau was like, nope, we're not having an election. I'm going to prorogue Parliament by 11 weeks. Justin Trudeau made the excuse that we need to allow the Liberal Party to choose a new leader. But the political party, that has nothing to do with the government of Canada. It's just a party issue.
Yeah.
A party's internal things that they need to figure out has nothing to do with the government. And so that should never be an excuse to prorogue government. So we're suing them, challenging that decision in court. We'll see what the judges are going to say, but and Justice Centre lawyers are citing a case, a 2019 England case, where Boris Johnson prorogued Parliament for 5 weeks in order to get the Brexit passed quicker. He didn't want to be scrutinized, face all the public criticism that he's going to face, so he just prorogued it. And so they challenged the court case, and the court made the decision that it was in fact illegal, and the MPs could come back the next day.
Wow.
And so we're citing that case, and we'll see if we can get Parliament sitting or back in session, I guess, before the 11 weeks are up, and so that would just cause an earlier election.
Right. Yeah. What is your prediction with the election?
I can't make any predictions. I've heard a couple of thoughts and comments on it. Here's the interesting thing. Now, the party did announce yesterday that they were going to announce their new leader on, I think, March 9th.
Wow.
Is that right? I can't remember. 2 weeks ahead of March 24, when this parliament is set to resume. Before that, I heard an argument that if they were not going to be able to figure out or choose a leader before March 24, and the parliament was going to come back in session, that would mean Justin Trudeau would still be the leader and would still be prime minister, and he could still run again for another round. It's very unlikely that he would remain the prime minister, that he would be voted back in, but there could perhaps be some possibility of that. In terms of who will be the leader of the political party, it's hard to say at this point, because the electorate that is going to vote on the leadership does not necessarily reflect the Liberal Party leadership people, or the politicos in general. If it was the politicals, then maybe Carney. It looks like Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of Canada and former governor of the Bank of England, who is a huge global agenda guy, and green agenda and so on, probably almost even more so than Trudeau, say some. Only he's way more articulate and way smarter, so he'd be able to convince Canadians way easier than Trudeau about some of these things. So potentially way more dangerous.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and there's a good chance that he will come on, but it's also hard to say because we don't really know exactly what the Liberal electorate are going to want. So lots can change.
What about the federal election? When's that going to happen?
It's likely going to be called. If everything goes according to what it looks like it's going to go, then the election will likely be called either on March 24, when Parliament, I think the Prime Minister makes the throne speech, and their agenda is being voted on. And so with that agenda being voted on, that would be a confidence motion. And so there's a good chance that MPs would choose to just vote a no confidence in him. But if they don't do it then it's likely going to happen within a week of that. So maybe, I think the minimum in Canada, you need to have a minimum of 5 weeks from the time you announce an election. Yeah, it would probably be, I think, in May sometime. Maybe mid-May that we're going to have an election. Perhaps, I don't know.
Wow.
I think that's likely.
Do you think that what happened in the States is going to happen in Canada?
What do you mean by that?
Unexpected conservative sweep?
Well, it wouldn't be unexpected in Canada. In the United States, it was hard to tell because all the polls showed Trump and Kamala being head-to-head in battle. And some polls even showed Kamala Harris on top. A lot of that was probably biased, but there was also a lot of people just being wrong. In Canada, Pierre has been polling above Trudeau for a long time. In fact, in recent months, he's been 20 points ahead of Trudeau. So that would give the Canadian Conservative Party more than 200 seats. So it would likely generate the largest Conservative majority, or the largest majority of all time. I don't quite remember exactly the numbers, but at least the largest Conservative majority government that we've ever had. With the Liberal leadership coming up here, they will be in the news a lot. Canadians who don't really pay attention to the news, they will be they will now see so much on the news about the Liberal Party, and then the Liberal soon-to-be leader is going to get a lot of attention in the lead up of the election even being announced, And so that could generate enough publicity for the Liberal Party that alone could increase their momentum and popularity, but also, just a new leader and so on, like a lot of voters who were now disillusioned with Trudeau were like, oh man, that man's got to go. Now, they might change their mind with a new leader depending on who the leader is. So, yeah, it's hard to say. Maybe, the Liberals are going to be able to get up to 5 points back. So, down from, that would bring Conservatives potentially down from 20-point lead to maybe a 15-point lead, which would have a significant impact, but still give them majority government, I think. So, yeah, we'll see. Exciting. It is very exciting. Very exciting. Can't wait to see what that election will hold. So.
Well, thanks for coming on my podcast, Ben.
Of course, my pleasure. It was so much fun. I love this topic, and I love the topic about politics and church and so on. So